Hello folks, and welcome to another tutorial. To begin this necklace, we are going to be using 20 gauge solid brass wire to create the chain links. You could also use a 22 gauge wire for not as heavy of weight, but I'm going to be using the 20 gauge wire. For beads, I chose these Amazonite spacer beads. We will be using our nylon jaw pliers, a set of wire cutters, and then this new pair of pliers, which is a bent chain nose plier, and then we also will be using our round nose pliers. To begin creating, we are going to use the nylon jaw pliers to smooth and straighten out our 20 gauge wire. We are going to take one bead and thread it onto the wire. When selecting your beads, make sure that you pick one that has a hole that is large enough to fit on the size of wire that you are using. Then using our round nose pliers, we are going to begin creating a loop at the end of the wire, leaving about a ½ inch or a little more wire sticking out of the end of the pliers. We're going to bend it over and create a loop. You can place the wire wherever you would like within the jaw of the pliers. It just depends on what size you want the loop to be. Now using our bent chain nose pliers, we are going to grasp the short end of the wire and begin wrapping it around and around down the long end of the wire. Holding the loop on the round nose pliers makes it much easier to wrap that short end around the long end of wire. As you come to the end of the wrapping, make sure that the end of the wire is securely tightened down against that long end of wire. Now that we have finished creating the loop, we are going to draw that bead up against the base of the loop. Now to begin creating the second loop on the other side of the bead, we're going to use our round nose pliers and place them right against the bead and bend the wire directly over at a 90 degrees. Then readjusting our pliers, we're going to turn them so that we can then wrap that long end of the wire up and around to create a second loop. Adjusting the chain link so that it is directly centered underneath that loop, then holding the loop securely, we will take the long end of the wire and wrap it until it fills up the space between the bead and the loop. Then using our wire cutters and placing the flush side of the cutters against the bead, we're going to cut off the extra wire. Twisting the loops side to side if we need to make them level with each other, and then going back to make sure that both ends of the wire are pressed down tightly. Now we have created our first chain link for the necklace. To begin creating our second chain link, we need to add the first one onto the wire and then add our next bead. The process for creating this link is exactly the same as the first one until we come to the second loop. But before we get there, let's go ahead and go back over how we make our chain link. Placing the wire into the pliers at any depth, depending on what size you want your loop, bend the wire directly over and create a circle out of the wire. Once the wire is in a circular shape, we'll use our bent chain nose pliers to take that short end of the wire and wrap it securely around the tail of the wire. Holding the loop securely in the round nose pliers makes this much easier to do. You can also squeeze the wrapping from end to end to make sure that it is pressed together. Then bringing the bead up against the loop, we're going to place the wire into the pliers directly against the bead and bend that wire over 90 degrees. Readjusting our hold on the wire, we will then take the long end of the wire and bring it around to create a circle. Now before wrapping that long end of the wire around to create a spiral, we want to leave it open so that we can bring that first chain link up into the loop that we just created. Once we have slid the first chain link into the loop that we just made, we will then press the wire down and then wrap it around to fill up the space between the loop and the bead. Once we have finished creating that wrap, we will then take the wire cutters and clip off the extra wire. Holding the loop that we just finished making, we want to use the bent chain nose pliers to securely press down that end of wire. Because this space is so small, we probably won't be able to fit a file in here to smooth down the ends of the wire, so that's why we want to make sure that it is pressed down with our pliers. And now we have finished creating our second chain link. Now obviously we just need to keep repeating this process until we have a chain that is long enough for whatever size of necklace we are making. The necklace I am making today is just over 15 inches long, which is a little bigger than an average choker length. This length of necklace fits nicely at the base of my neck. Online you can find different images and pictures that show you different necklace styles and the approximate length that you would need and a measurement in inches or whatever measurement you use. There's also a product which I have used to create almost every necklace I've made, and it's generally referred to as a bead board. This board has the measurement in inches on the board itself with the shape to create necklaces and bracelets, and I will link that for you guys here in the video. Alright, and so now we're going to get back to creating this chain link, and here we are creating the second loop of the chain link. This is the most important part where we have to make sure before we finish wrapping that long end of the wire and closing off the chain link, we have to make sure that we remember to bring up the other chain links that we made and slip them into the loop that we just created before we wrap that long end of the wire around. The reason I emphasize on this is because I have definitely forgotten to bring the chain up and add it into the loop. So this is your reminder to make sure that you add the chain link before wrapping that tail of the wire around and securing the bead and securing the loop of the chain link. And if this happens, it's certainly not a big deal at all. You've simply made another chain link. If we happen to end up with a quote-unquote spare chain link, we simply need to add it to the next chain link that we make in the first loop that we create. And then, as usual, adding the chain link onto the second loop, and there you go, we can proceed as usual. Alright folks, now that we have created a chain that is the length we need for the necklace we are making, we need to create the clasp of the necklace. We are going to use the same method for creating a chain link with a few different variations here. After adding our bead onto the wire, we are then going to create a loop in the wire. We are going to create this circle to be the same size as all of the other chain links that we have previously made. But before wrapping that short end of the wire around, we need to add our chain onto the loop. After adding the chain onto the loop, we can then press the wire together and then placing it into the round nose pliers, and using our chain nose pliers, we will then take that short end of the wire and wrap it around. Once we have finished wrapping and securing this wire, we are then going to draw up the bead. Then placing the wire into the pliers with the pliers directly against the bead, we are then going to draw the wire over to a 90 degrees. And then we are going to create a second loop. We want to make this one larger than the first one, so place the wire further down and towards the base of your pliers to create a larger loop than the first one. The hook of the clasp needs to fit into this loop, so keep that in mind when creating the size. Once you are happy with the size, then we take the long end of the wire and wrap it around to fill up the space between the bead and the loop. Using the wire cutters, we can then cut the wire off flush, and then with the bent chain nose pliers, we will then press down the end of the wire. If we need to press the loop flat, we can either use our bent chain nose pliers or the nylon jaw pliers to make sure that it is straight. You could create the hook without a bead, but I want to add a fun bit of color, so I'm going to go ahead and add a bead onto the wire, and then add our chain directly after the bead. We are then going to create a loop in the wire, just like when we create the chain links. Placing the wire into the pliers and then wrapping it around to create a circle, we want to go back and make sure that that long end of the wire is centered underneath the circle, and then we are going to make sure that we bring the chain up and add it into the loop. And then after adding the chain into the loop, we will place it back onto the round nose pliers and wrap that short end of the wire around and secure the chain onto the wire. Because this is part of the clasp, the hook of the clasp to be exact, I decided to leave a little extra length when creating this wrap so that it is a little bit longer than all the other wraps that we created with the chain links. Next, we are going to create the hook itself. You can make the hook longer or shorter depending on what you would like. I went about 1.5 inches out and then bent the wire over because we are going to double the wire before we create the shape of the hook. Doing this makes the hook stronger and less likely to pull or bend out of shape. Using the nylon jaw pliers, we want to squeeze that bend in the wire so that it is close together. Then we are going to place the end of that into our round nose pliers and bend it over slightly to create a little crook. Then moving down the wire and placing it back into the pliers, we're going to bend it over to create the hook shape. The goal is now to create a wrapping just above the bead here. Measuring down from the hook, leaving enough wire to create a wrapping, we are going to take the wire cutters and clip off the extra wire. Spacing your pliers up from the bead to leave room to create a wrap, we are going to take that short end of wire and wrap it around down towards the bead to create a wrap and secure the wire onto the hook. Make sure that you hold the wire that is doubled over securely in your round nose pliers because it will want to shift as you begin wrapping that short end of wire around. And then using our bent chain nose pliers, we are going to finish creating that wrap, bringing the wire down and around towards the bead. Once the wrapping is secured, you can see that the doubled wire has shifted it a little bit, so we're just going to use our fingers and gently bend that wire so that it is level and even with each other. I decided to adjust the hook a little bit by making the bend a little bit bigger around and then pressing the end of the hook down and slightly bending the crook a little bit more, adjusting it so that it has a nice tight closure to bring the clasp on and off. Now that we have finished the clasp, we have completed the entire necklace and it is beautiful. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and I'll see you next time.